If you go on YouTube and you search for something like famous movie scenes with music removed or movie scenes with the wrong music, what you'll find is something feels horribly wrong. Music can do everything from set the tone of a scene to signal to you how dramatic or scary or how fun the scene is supposed to be. And music properly employed can elevate any type of content from movies to commercials to, yes, even podcasts. But I know what you're probably thinking. Where do I find music? How do I properly use it? What if I want to make my own? And well, my friends, that's what we are going to talk about in today's video. Hey everybody, my name is Joe Casabona. I am the evangelist here at RSS.com, and I can tell you from over a decade experience in producing podcasts that music can really make or break a show. No music might make people feel disconnected from the show. The wrong music will set the wrong tone, and the points that you're making won't land properly. You can even use something called stingers to move between different segments or let people know an ad is coming. But if the music is distracting or overbearing, then it's not going to land the way that you like. So today we are going to talk about the kinds of music that you can have in your podcast, where to find that music, licensing, and what to do if you want to mix your own or use something like AI. So first, let's get into the type of music or the different kinds of music that you can have in your podcast. Okay, so first let's start with intro and outro music. This is the first impression and lasting memory of your show. It signals to people that the show is starting and the show is ending, and it's a nice way to bookend the show so that it doesn't start or end abruptly. Unlike a YouTube video where you're just supposed to get into the meat of the video, with a podcast, you might want to let people know that your show is starting. People might be listening to a bunch of shows in a row, and because of pre-roll and post-roll ads, people might not know where one show ends and one begins. And your intro and outro music is a great way to let people know, hey, the show is starting, and hey, the show is over. There's also transition music or stingers. These are brief musical segments between topics. So if you have a segmented show, you can play a little music between those segments to let people know you're moving on to the next thing. Because there are generally no visuals associated with podcasts, this music is going to be the way that people know you're moving on to the next thing. There's also background music. This sets the mood for storytelling or dramatic sections. I would say that if you have an interview show, background music may not be easy to employ because you don't want it to step on what your guest is saying. But if you are doing a solo show, a storytelling show, then the background music will go a long way in driving your point home. And again, in signaling to your listener the mood that you're trying to set with this part of the audio. And finally, there are ad bumpers. These are distinct sounds to signal commercial breaks. Some people believe that this is required. You do need to clearly signal, at least in the United States, when you are doing an ad and when you are not. And podcasts like to employ a little, it could just be like a chime or a little sound, right? Something like this to let people know that the ads are coming. Now, no matter what, you do have to consider the legal ramifications of your music. You can't just go out there and pick your favorite song from the radio because most of the time those rights holders will want some sort of royalty or payment for you to keep using the music. There are legal considerations. So let's look at some of these licensing terms. First of all, a lot of people think royalty-free means free, and it doesn't. What royalty-free means is you pay once for the license, and then you can use the music without paying additional royalties each time it plays. On Spotify, when you play a song, the artist gets some royalty each time the song is played. So if they get 10 cents per play and you play it 10 times, they get $1. But if Spotify or the artist has a royalty-free contract with Spotify, then they would pay one lump sum no matter how many times the song is played. This is most ideal for podcasters like us who aren't looking to pay every time we play our intro or outro music. So it just generally means no ongoing payments. There are also one-time purchases versus subscription models. So we'll look at a few examples later, but when you look at even royalty-free music, sometimes you could just purchase the song outright one time and have it. Sometimes you have a subscription where you pay monthly to access to the full royalty-free library. And the reason that this subscription differs from ongoing or additional royalties is because you are paying a subscription per month for access to the music. You're not paying per play. And that's the main difference. So when you are looking for music, you definitely want to look for royalty-free music. But when you're looking at the libraries where that music lives, you could be looking at a one-time versus a subscription purchase. Some places, like I believe Audio Jungle, do offer both, where you can subscribe or you can just buy the royalty-free music outright one time, and there's going to be a cost difference there. There's also single versus multi-use licenses. So for certain licenses, you will be able to use that song in one project, right? If you have one podcast and you like that music, you may be able to use it there, but you might not also be able to use it on, say, your YouTube channel or a second podcast, versus multi-use licenses, which basically say, yes, you are paying to use this music. You can use it wherever you want. And then finally, there could be commercial versus non-commercial usage. So if you are using the music for a personal project, that would be considered non-commercial use. But if you are using it in some sort of commerce, or I would say, now this is, I'll hedge here and say that this is not legal advice, but I would say if you're making money from your podcast or your podcast is an asset in your business, that would be commercial use. And so you'd want to make sure that the music that you're getting allows for commercial use. Now, there are lots of other legal terms. Again, none of this is legal advice. I am not a lawyer. And so you should really look at the rules around the music that you're looking at. Most sites make this pretty clear, including the ones I'm going to show you in a little bit. But understanding copyright, royalty free, and then things like commercial versus non-commercial, single use versus multi-use are really important. Again, wherever you're getting the music from should make the usage rights clear to you, but you just want to make sure. One more thing that we should also consider here is attribution. Even with a royalty-free license, or even if you're not paying for the music, you may be required to properly credit the music you're using. And again, you'd want to check with the creator of the music or the site that you're downloading from. Sometimes it's good enough to mention it in the show notes, but you may potentially need to mention it in the episode by saying, intro music provided by, and then whoever created the music. Again, you're going to want to read the licensing terms when you get that music. So now let's look at some places where you can actually find music. And I'm going to show you two I've personally used and one I'm familiar with and I'm a big fan of. Okay, so first let's look at Music for Makers. This is probably the most creator-friendly terms I've ever seen. It is royalty-free, and I've got the license terms up here, but you can go to musicformakers.com. So let's look at what you can do. First, you can download and add any music to your projects for free. He does encourage donations. His name is Logan, by the way. You can use the music in commercial projects, creative works that you're getting paid for, monetized YouTube videos. So it is a royalty-free commercial license. You can use it as many times as you want forever, so it does not expire, and it's a multi-use license. And attribution is not required, which means that you don't even have to tell people where the music came from. He does have a few things you can't do, though. Use your music for evil, where he specifies what forbidden uses are. You can't alter it in any way. You can't share or resell it, or you can't use the music to build a similar or competing service or to train an AI model. So if you're just downloading any of the songs here to use in your podcast, then you can use it as much as you'd like. So you can sample this. It's also by tags. I really like this website. The next site is Thrum. That's THRUMM, and that's thrum.audio. They have an ongoing subscription where you will get full library access. So the pricing is based on your use. So for use in one ongoing video, podcast, or radio project with a total monthly production budget of up to $500, use in one ongoing video, podcast, or radio project, and it's based on budget. So this licensing is definitely not as clear as, say, Music for Makers. It's also, it could get pretty expensive. But this offers really great white glove service customization options, and you can pay per project or multi-project licensing. So if you are in the business of producing podcasts, this could be a great option for you. And finally, a similar but slightly clearer model is Epidemic Sound. So they also have a subscription. This will get you for $9 or $10 a month, unlimited downloads, licensing for social podcasts and web, monetize one channel per platform. So you can compare the features here and look into what you need for your show, what kind of licensing, and of course, what music really works best for you. Epidemic Sounds has both music and sound effects, so that's also a really great thing to have. I will also mention that services like Descript, if you're using Descript, have music libraries and sound effects. The same thing goes for Adobe Podcasts. So you could use those services if you're already using them to edit or clean up your audio, see what they have available to you. I will just say, though, that with more popular services, you do run the risk of potentially having duplicate music to somebody. Back when I first started, I was listening to a podcast that happened to use the same music that I was using, and I wanted to change it pretty quickly, which brings me to the next thing that we should talk about: how to find the right music. So there's a couple of things that you want to consider here. First of all, you want to match the tone to the content. You don't want to have some mismatch where you have a comedy podcast and you're playing super dramatic music, or a true crime podcast and you're playing something uplifting, right? So you want to make sure to match the tone to the content. One of the things I really like about Music for Makers, that I suspect you'll also get with Thrum, because they do have that white glove service, is you can search for music kind of based on the tone and the vibe. So you want to definitely make sure that you're finding music to match the tone of your show. When I am looking for music for my podcast, I usually use words like uplifting and hopeful, not too heavy, right? Those sort of things, because I want people to get into the mindset that's ready for them to learn, and I want them to feel good and relaxed as they're going to, listen to my podcast. You also want to avoid musical cliches, right? If you have a tech podcast, like using like the hyper technical, like beep boop music is probably overdone at this point. And so you want to avoid those because you want your show to have a unique sound. You want people to know that once your music starts, they are listening to your show. That also means that you want to have some consistency. And so you don't want to change the type of music or stingers dramatically moving throughout the show. One of my new favorite podcasts is called How I Made Your Mother. And the music that they use throughout the show pretty much is a single song that Josh Radnor, who played Ted, wrote called New York City. I think it's just called NYC, actually. But they play various segments of the song throughout the show, especially during ad breaks. And the intro and outro are just like really, they picked the verses that work best for the intro and outro of a show. And they start to tone it down when you're doing something like an ad break. So that's also something that you would want to consider when you're putting together what I'm calling a musical toolkit, right? Your intro and outro music, your stingers, your background music. You want it all to have a similar feel, right? The reason that movies don't have multiple composers is because they want everything to sound and feel consistent. And this is what you can do by creating your own musical toolkit as well. But that's really only part of the battle, right? You also need to make sure that your audio mixing or audio engineering is done properly. So let's talk about the technical considerations. First of all, length. Your intros and well, your intro should definitely be 15 to 30 seconds max. You don't want to spend a lot of time here. This is just to signal to people that the show is starting. Your outro can be a little bit longer because people are probably going to leave before the end of the outro anyway, and you can kind of let that linger and properly fade it out, right? Which brings me to my next point. Let's talk about volume levels and ducking, right? So I would say when you're bringing in music, you want to fade it in so that you don't like scare the life out of your listener. And as you start talking, you should fade that out. The same thing anytime you're bringing in music throughout the show or the outro. You also want to employ something called ducking, and this is when the music gets lower when someone is talking. Apps like ScreenFlow or I believe Adobe Podcasts have something called auto duck, which means if you put, bed or background music underneath a spoken word, it will automatically duck that. But what I'll usually do in Logic Pro is just lower the music so it's consistently a bit lower than the words I'm speaking. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want the music to compete with your vocals. Your vocals are the important part, right? And we've probably all watched a video or even a movie or TV show where the mixing was off and the sound effects and the music overpowered the dialogue in a way that made it hard to watch. You definitely don't want to do that for your podcast. And finally, you also want to consider frequency range. So like there is some music that will just straight up drown out your voice and it has to be really low, and that's also not going to be ideal. So as you pick music, definitely test out the music, right? Download some. It's going to be tagged, what's called tagged, which means that if you download music from, say, Epidemic Sound, but you haven't paid for it yet, it'll be tagged, which means it'll say Epidemic Sound somewhere in there. But it will give you an idea for how it sounds against your vocals. I would strongly encourage you do that when you're trying to find good music for your podcast. Now, if you can't find or don't want to find good music for your podcast, you also have the option of creating your own music. So what does that look like? Well, there are a few options, right? There are do-it-yourself options. So you can try using something like GarageBand if you have a Mac. There are tutorials on how to do that. There are also online beat makers and loop libraries, so you can download loops and put things together. I would say unless you really know what you're doing or really want to learn this is probably not the best option. You'd be better off paying the $20 a month for Epidemic Sound to find something, or find something in Music for Makers or a different royalty-free library. I think that's probably the best thing to do. If you really want custom music, you could try hiring a professional. So there are places like Fiverr and Upwork where there are freelancers where somebody can create some music for you. Again, you want to be wary of that because you don't really know what you're getting with a Fiverr or an Upwork, right? You could also work with composers. So you can find audio engineers or composers. They'll kind of guide you through the process and what works for you and what doesn't. That is definitely going to be on the more expensive end though. So those are all options you want to do. I would say if you are just starting out, definitely look at one of the libraries we looked at earlier. They have lots of options and you should be able to find something that you like. And then you'll start to learn your tastes a little more, right? So, I've been podcasting for a while. I've used stuff from Music for Makers. I might be ready to move on to working with a composer since I've rebranded recently. And maybe I want to find something else with a unique sound. But it's taken me a long time to get to that point. Now, the last thing that you probably saw there is AI generated music. There are a lot of AI generators out there. And I would just caution you and say, with anything AI, you might lose the personality. It might take a long time to prompt it the right way. But that said, I did try an AI music generator from Deep AI. The prompt I put in was, I have a podcast where I interview busy solopreneur parents on how to improve their business and save time through automation through no code solutions. I'd like to create music that's fun, upbeat, hopeful, and clean. And this is what it came up with. I would qualify this as a little boring and very generic. I couldn't hear that just felt like generic intro or hold music, right? I couldn't feel my personality. Like I couldn't feel any personality in it. Maybe that's me, maybe I'm being too harsh. But, I would say that it might take you a bunch of time to figure out what works for you with AI generated music. But again, for my money, I'm saying go with something like Music for Makers or Epidemic Sound or Thrum. The last thing I'll say here is you also want to get feedback and you probably want to test some different options, right? You could send music to your mailing list and ask them what they like, ask on social media, roll out the song that you like best and ask for feedback from your listeners. But that's going to be really important too. I will say, just kind of like based on my own experience, that if the music is off or weird or something, somebody will email me, right? Because that deeply affects the listening experience. And so the last thing I will end with is this: dedicate some time to finding the right music. Don't just grab the first thing that feels okay to you, because it does have an impact on the listener. When people are listening and the listening experience is bad, they will leave. And that doesn't just mean having a great microphone versus the built-in microphone. It's all about the mix. If your music fades in too loudly or too quickly, if it's too loud over the vocals or the sound effects are not very good, then people are going to leave. So spend some time on this and don't rush into a decision for the sake of having it. Find the music that feels good for your show. Okay, so to recap, we talked about different types of music you can use in your podcast, from intro and outro music to stingers and bumpers to music that signals that an ad is about to happen. We gave you some tips for choosing the right music, how to match the tone of your show, and creating a musical toolkit to create some consistency and to help you stand out. We talked about some of the legal and licensing terms. We talked about what royalty free actually means, something I didn't mention earlier, but we kind of danced around it. So a term that you might come across is Creative Commons. We did look at all of the terms around Creative Commons. We looked at single versus multi-use, one-time versus subscription, commercial versus non-commercial, attribution, and much more. We looked at some places where you can get music. We looked at how to mix the music, or at least we talked about what to consider when mixing the music. And then we talked about creating custom music, including the benefits of using AI, which is it's going to be really easy, versus the drawbacks, which is you probably will get something that is fairly generic sounding. So sound off in the comments. What questions do you have about music? Do you have music or a favorite place to find music for your show? Let us know. And thanks so much for watching. My name's Joe Casabona. I'm the evangelist here at RSS.com. At RSS.com, we want to help you launch your podcast and take it to new heights. Our goal is to help as many podcasters as possible. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you out there.